What if the single biggest driver of hospital overcrowding and just general systemic medical collapse isn't what we think it is?
Right.
I mean, what if it's not a mutated virus or like a new biological pathogen?
Yeah, that is the big question.
Because what if the root cause of the crisis we are watching unfold right now in our emergency rooms is actually a piece of paper?
A piece of paper, yeah, like an eviction notice.
Exactly. An eviction notice or, a final demand letter from a bank.
It sounds so counterintuitive, right? Especially when we are so conditioned to view healthcare strictly through the lens of biology.
Right. We always think of pathogens, viruses, bacteria.
Exactly. We don't typically think of a looming court date or intense exam pressure as contagious diseases.
But they kind of are.
They absolutely are. Because when you look at the raw data surrounding hospital admissions, the physiological manifestation of extreme sociological stress is, well, it's entirely indistinguishable from an acute medical emergency.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is.
So if you are listening to this right now, you are likely an impact investor, a philanthropist, maybe a CSR leader, or a policymaker.
Or a health innovator, yeah.
Right. You are someone who manages capital policy or platforms, and you are acutely aware that the global healthcare infrastructure is currently buckling.
The math just no longer works. It really doesn't.
It doesn't. And today, our mission on this deep dive is to explore a comprehensive, evidence-led briefing that provides a highly specific, scalable lever to fundamentally change that math.
Yes.
We're looking at the Prina Kiosk project, and specifically, the proprietary engine powering it, which is called Dr. Maya GPT.
And I think we should establish immediately what this technology is not.
Yeah, that's crucial.
Because this is not a pitch for another sleek symptom checker app designed for affluent users in Silicon Valley.
Right, we have plenty of those.
Way too many.
Right.
And it is not a rigid algorithmic black box that just matches your cough to a Wikipedia article.
So what are we actually talking about here?
We are talking about a community empowerment platform. It is designed to intercept panic before it ever reaches a hospital.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and by doing that, it drastically reduces unnecessary medical demand and creates a sustainable, village-level microeconomic engine in the process.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we are really looking at a paradigm shift in how we handle medical anxiety here.
A massive shift.
Because the systemic collapse we are facing is not like some distant theoretical problem.
Yeah, it's happening right now.
The timeline we are dealing with points to the period between 2028 and 2035 as the window where the current top-down doctor-centered model simply ceases to function at scale.
Which is terrifyingly close.
It is. We are rapidly entering a post-antibiotic era. And the centralized hospital, the place we have been trained for a century to view as the ultimate sanctuary of healing, is becoming one of the most dangerous places a vulnerable person can go.
Which brings us to the core definition of the intervention itself.
Right, PRIMA.
Exactly. PRIMA stands for Personal Risk Evaluation and Mental Assurance.
Okay, so what does that actually look like in the real world?
In its physical form, it is a local, easy-to-use, multilingual advisory and triage kiosk.
So like a physical terminal.
Yeah. It is purposefully engineered to be deployed in rural villages, in dense, urban poor areas, remote communities, and directly inside local pharmacies.
So it's right there where the people are.
Exactly. It serves as a decentralized node of medical logic. It entirely bypasses the need for a patient to travel to a major clinical center just to understand what is happening in their own body.
But, before we can debate the hardware or the AI architecture or the unit economics of a kiosk network, which we will get to, we have to isolate the underlying disease this technology is actually treating.
Right, the root cause.
Because this is where the briefing fundamentally alters the traditional medical narrative. It asserts as a clinical baseline that fear is the first infection.
That is such a powerful phrase, the first infection.
And furthermore, it claims that fear actually kills more people than disease.
And we really need to break down the biological mechanism of that claim because it's not just poetry. It is entirely grounded in neuroendocrinology.
Okay, break that down for us.
So the human brain, specifically the amygdala, which is the region responsible for processing threats, has a major architectural flaw when it comes to modern society.
A flaw? What do you mean?
It cannot differentiate between a real, immediate physical threat and an imaginary or conceptual fear.
Wait, so you're saying the panic about being sick actually makes you sick?
Exactly. Whether a tiger is actively chasing you or you are just lying awake at 3 a.m. terrified about how you are going to pay a debt, the alarm bell in the brain rings at the exact same frequency.
Wow. Precisely the same frequency.
Precisely. When that alarm rings, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, activates. Your body floods with adrenaline and cortisol to prepare you to fight or flee.
Right, the classic fight or flight response.
Yeah. Now, in a short, acute burst-like running from that tiger cortisol is incredibly helpful.
It keeps you alive.
Exactly. But when the threat is a pending eviction or fear of an undiagnosed illness or intense religious anxiety, you don't run it off. You just sit with it.
You're just marinating in it.
Yeah, you steep in those hormones for days, weeks, or even months.
And chronic exposure to cortisol is highly destructive to the immune system. I remember looking at studies showing how prolonged stress literally downregulates the glucocorticoid receptors on white blood cells.
It does. Your immune system just stops responding effectively to inflammatory signals.
So it creates this biological paradox. The intense fear of becoming sick actively suppresses your immune function, making your body a highly hospitable environment for opportunistic bacteria and viruses.
The panic about the illness literally invites the illness in. And this completely recontextualizes how we have to view the people flooding our emergency rooms.
Because traditional symptom checkers, like the ones we all have on our phones, they completely ignore this mechanism.
They ignore it entirely.
If I wake up with chest tightness and heart palpitations, and I type those symptoms into a standard internet search, within 30 seconds, the algorithm tells me I am likely experiencing a myocardial infarction.
The heart attack.
Right. And my cortisol spikes, my breathing becomes shallow, the chest tightness worsens, and my immediate reaction is to rush to the emergency room.
And, the algorithm does that by design. Standard symptom checkers mechanize symptom matching while optimizing for liability protection.
Oh, because of the lawyers.
Exactly. They operate on naïve Bayes classifiers or similar statistical models that simply map your input to the most severe possible outcome. Because failing to warn you about a heart attack is a massive legal risk for the software developer.
So they strip away all human context.
Totally. They treat the body like a broken machine, completely isolated from the person's sociological reality.
Which ignores what the briefing calls the hidden drivers of illness.
Right.
Because a massive percentage of individuals presenting with acute physical symptoms are actually suffering from intense non-medical distress.
Debt, unemployment, severe family conflict,
workplace harassment, exam stress, legal disputes, social isolation.
What's fascinating here is that the physiological manifestation of a panic attack brought on by a bank letter looks, feels, and clinically presents almost identically to an acute cardiac or respiratory event.
Shortness of breath, dizziness, abdominal cramping, radiating chest pain.
Exactly. But when that terrified patient arrives at the hospital, the clinical protocols are completely blind to the sociological pathogen.
Right. If I show up in the ER with a racing heart, the triage nurse doesn't ask me about my financial debt or my pending divorce.
No, because the clinical environment is built to find biological pathogens, to detect structural abnormalities, and to measure chemical imbalances.
They only look for what they can measure.
Yeah, traditional doctors respond clinically to what they can visually observe and empirically test. But patients suffer based on what they feel.
That creates a massive gap in diagnostic logic.
A huge gap. The patient is demanding relief from a profound sense of physical distress, and the doctor is desperately trying to find a biological justification for that distress.
And this misalignment is what triggers the hospital trap.
Yes, the hospital trap.
This is where the individual tragedy of a panic attack scales up into a catastrophic global health crisis. Right. Because when a patient is terrified, they demand action.
They do. They demand tests, they demand scans, and most dangerously, they demand medication.
And once a patient crosses the threshold of a modern hospital, an entirely different set of systemic pressures takes over.
Right, because doctors are operating under immense time constraints and crippling legal liability.
Defensive medicine.
Exactly. If a doctor sends a highly anxious patient home without a prescription, and that patient subsequently deteriorates, the legal repercussions for the physician are severe.
So defensive medicine becomes the default protocol. It's the only rational survival strategy for the physician in a litigious environment.
They examine, they run extensive diagnostic investigations, they document every microscopic variable, and most critically, they overprescribe broad-spectrum antibiotics just to be safe.
Even if they suspect the underlying issue is viral or psychosomatic.
Yeah, because handing the patient a prescription for antibiotics provides a tangible physical validation of the patient's distress. It calms the fear.
But treating psychological fear with biological antibiotics is exactly how we arrived at the antimicrobial resistance crisis.
AMR.
Right, AMR. If we are speaking to health innovators and policymakers right now, this is the existential threat. I've heard it described as a slow-moving pandemic, but after looking at the numbers in the briefing, I think a better metaphor is a massive cybersecurity breach.
That is a really good analogy.
Because when you flood an environment with unnecessary antibiotics, you aren't just killing bugs, you are actively training the surviving bacteria.
You are handing them the source code to our bad chemical weapons.
Exactly. You are forcing them to mutate and share those resistance mechanisms.
And hospitals are the genetic trading floors where that resistance is built and shared.
The data points we have in the briefing are just grim.
They really are. AMR is already directly responsible for over 1 million deaths annually worldwide.
And that is not a projection. That is a current baseline metric.
The colonization rates are staggering. The briefing highlights that 83% of people inside hospitals in India, and this includes the doctors, the nurses, the administrative staff, and the patients, are colonized with AMR bacteria or multi-drug resistant fungi.
83%. So just by walking through the doors, you are exposing yourself to pathogens that modern medicine can no longer kill.
The World Health Organization data aligns with this, estimating that 7 to 10% of all hospitalized patients globally acquire a healthcare-associated infection.
And it is not just isolated to intensive care units or surgical wards, right?
No, not at all. There is a deeply concerning cross-sectional study from An-Najah National University focusing on a tertiary care hospital in Palestine.
What do they find?
They specifically analyzed the radiology department, which is an area usually considered a relatively sterile diagnostic zone.
Right, you're just getting a scan.
Exactly. But they concluded that the radiology department itself is a potent source of multi-drug-resistant microorganisms.
I want to make sure the investors and policymakers listening fully grasp the terrifying irony of that.
It's incredibly dark.
A patient experiences severe abdominal pain, which is actually the physiological manifestation of extreme workplace stress. They rush to the hospital out of fear.
Right.
The doctor, practicing defensive medicine, orders a CT scan. The patient is wheeled into the radiology department, a surface is contaminated, and while receiving a diagnostic test they never biologically needed, they contract a multi-drug-resistant superbug.
And on top of the infection risk, the sheer volume of chaotic, fear-driven admissions leads to inevitable human error. Medical errors in diagnosis and treatment are currently cited as the third leading cause of death.
The compounding math is devastating. Fear acts as a massive public health multiplier.
It really does. The psychological panic drives the unnecessary hospital visit. The unnecessary visit leads to exposure in a highly colonized environment.
And that exposure, combined with the doctor's liability anxiety, leads to massive, unnecessary antibiotic prescribing.
And that prescribing accelerates AMR, pushing the entire global health infrastructure toward that 2028 to 2035 systemic collapse window.
We have built a healthcare system that optimizes for end-stage biological failure, but completely ignores the psychological entry point.
Exactly. So if the system is buckling under the weight of fear-driven, unnecessary visits, the only viable mathematical solution is to intercept that panic at the community level.
Before the patient ever reaches the hospital door.
Right. Which brings us to the technological intervention. The Prima kiosk and the Dr. Maya GPT engine.
Yes, let's talk about the hardware first. Because if we are talking about deploying sophisticated technology into rural villages, urban slums, and remote areas, my immediate skepticism as an investor is hardware decay.
Oh, sure.
We have all seen well-intentioned charity projects where iPads or screens are dropped into a village, and 6 months later they are abandoned, broken, or stripped for parts because the power grid failed.
That is a highly valid concern, and it is exactly why the physical architecture of the Prima kiosk is entirely divorced from consumer electronics.
So it's not just a big iPad.
No, not at all. It is a standalone, tamper-resistant, weatherproof terminal. You can visualize it as a hybrid between an industrial public ATM and a highly advanced digital communication hub.
It has to survive the environment.
It is engineered for environments with extreme infrastructure deficits. It does not require a stable national power grid. It is designed to run efficiently on modular solar and battery power.
That's huge.
Furthermore, it does not rely on continuous high-speed broadband internet. It can perform its core triage logic and data synchronization over low bandwidth or intermittent connections.
So the hardware is a resilient, decentralized node. But, the hardware is ultimately just a metal and glass vessel. The true intellectual property, The actual revolution we need to unpack is the software engine running inside it.
Dr. Maya GPT.
Exactly. The briefing emphasizes that this was developed by Dr. Kadiyali Srivatsa, utilizing 40 years of direct clinical experience.
Yeah, 4 decades of experience.
And the core differentiator is that Dr. Maya consciously abandons the standard algorithmic approach.
It abandons the black box diagnostic model entirely.
How so?
While typical AI in healthcare tries to replicate the encyclopedic knowledge of a medical textbook, it takes a symptom, cross-references a massive database of diseases, and outputs a statistical probability of a specific diagnosis.
Which, as we discussed, just terrifies people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dr. Srivatsa recognized that this is exactly what drives panic. A patient doesn't need to know there's a 2% chance they have a rare lymphoma. They need to know what to do in the next hour.
Right. So Dr. Maya uses what the documentation calls a patient-centered, color-coded logic based on pattern reasoning.
Yes, pattern reasoning.
It fundamentally changes the question from what specific disease do you have to what is the pattern of your distress and what is the safest immediate action.
The architecture of the logic requires the input of 3 combined symptoms, but crucially, it integrates emotional tagging into the vector space of the analysis.
What does that mean, emotional tagging?
It means it measures the duration of the physical symptom alongside the acute psychological state of the user. Is the user reporting mild fatigue, or are they reporting extreme panic alongside the fatigue? The emotional data weights the clinical output.
Wow, that's brilliant. And the output itself is stripped of terrifying medical jargon. It utilizes a universal 4-color triage system.
Yes.
This feels like an incredibly elegant way to simplify complex medical decision-making across varied literacy levels. Let's dig into the mechanics of these colors, starting with red.
Red is the highest severity indicator for the individual. It signifies serious, acute illness.
So what's the instruction for red?
The instruction is unequivocal. Always ask or consult a doctor immediately or proceed directly to the nearest emergency room. Red represents a clear, present physiological danger, suspected myocardial infarction, severe stroke symptoms, acute trauma that requires immediate professional medical intervention.
And the logic engine dictates that red naturally overrides the lower tier colors like green and yellow.
Right.
I mean, if you have a mild rash, but you are also experiencing crushing chest pain, the system flags red.
Of course.
But what absolutely fascinated me in the technical breakdown is that red is not the ultimate override in the system. The absolute highest priority command is blue.
Blue is the paradigm shift.
Explain blue.
Blue indicates an acute infection risk. The instruction tied to a blue code is to isolate immediately, speak to a doctor or nurse remotely, and absolutely do not travel.
So it overrides everything.
In the algorithmic hierarchy of Dr. Maya, blue overrides everything else, including red.
I have to push back on this because from a liability standpoint, this sounds incredibly risky.
It does sound risky at first.
I mean, if someone is exhibiting symptoms that could be an emergency, maybe severe respiratory distress, but they also have symptoms indicating a highly contagious, potentially drug-resistant infection, you're telling me the machine instructs them to stay home. How is keeping a severely ill patient away from a hospital safe?
Because it is the ultimate public health defense mechanism.
Explain that.
If an individual is carrying a highly virulent, contagious pathogen, directing them to physically travel on public transport, walk into a crowded pharmacy, or sit in a packed emergency room waiting area is exactly how local outbreaks mutate into regional epidemics.
Right. You're trying to stop the spread.
The Blue Protocol does not deny them care. It fundamentally alters the routing of that care. It prioritizes remote medical intervention, dispatching a local health worker, or triggering an urgent telemedicine consult while actively breaking the chain of transmission.
So it serves as a firewall for the hospital itself. It protects the centralized clinical infrastructure from being overrun by contagious agents.
Exactly. It sacrifices the traditional instinct of rushing to the building in favor of isolating and securing remote guidance, which is really the only mathematically viable way to slow antimicrobial resistance at a population level.
That structural logic is brilliant. Okay, then we move down the severity scale to yellow, which indicates mild to moderate symptoms.
Right. The guidance here is to self-manage at home using highly specific advice provided by Dr. Maya, or to consult a local chemist or pharmacist.
And finally, green, indicating a moderate, non-urgent illness.
For green, the user is directed to speak to a nurse triage service, similar to NHS 111 in the UK, or to schedule a routine appointment with a general practitioner. It requires professional attention, but it is not an immediate adrenaline-fueled emergency.
The overarching philosophy here is crucial. Dr. Maya does not diagnose. It triages severity.
Yes. It mimics the heuristic intuition of a seasoned junior doctor who looks at a patient in the waiting room and quickly calculates, are you safe to go home and rest, or do we need to secure a bed for you immediately?
It stops the diagnostic rabbit hole and provides an actionable directive.
And the behavioral data from the initial deployments validates this exact use case perfectly.
What does the data show?
The usage analytics reveal a striking pattern. 73% of all consultations on the kiosk occur between 8 p.m. and 2 a.m.
The middle of the night. That is the witching hour for anxiety.
It really is. The average session duration is exactly 12 minutes. And the most common presenting complaints are pediatric fever, undiagnosed abdominal pain, and general respiratory symptoms.
When you look at that data through the lens of human behavior, it tells a very clear story.
What do you see?
At 1 a.m., when a young mother is awake, holding a child with a fever, terrified, she doesn't actually want a differential diagnosis of rare pediatric autoimmune disorders.
No, of course not.
She wants an authority figure to hold her hand, evaluate the immediate risk, and give her permission to wait until morning. She wants reassurance.
The 12-minute session provides exactly that. It is structured, empathetic reasoning. Dr. Maya evaluates the child's symptoms, perhaps outputs a yellow code, provides specific instructions on hydration and temperature management, and effectively cancels that panicked 2 a.m. drive to the overcrowded emergency room.
It intercepts the fear.
Exactly.
It is a remarkable application of artificial intelligence. But, as any health innovator knows, technology, regardless of how advanced the neural network is entirely useless if the people who need it most cannot physically or intellectually interact with it.
This is a huge problem with most health tech.
Right. A brilliant AI wrapped in a complex, text-heavy smartphone app completely alienates the most vulnerable populations on Earth. So how does Prima solve the barrier of illiteracy and digital exclusion?
The interface design of the kiosk is really a masterclass in accessibility. It completely discards the assumption of digital literacy.
How does it work then?
The kiosk features either a touch-free or a highly simplified touchscreen interface. But the critical innovation is that it operates almost entirely through voice input and output, supported by universal visual cues.
Voice input.
Yeah, and it processes this natural language in over 30 languages and local dialects.
The documentation paints such a vivid, compelling picture of the target user base. Imagine an 85-year-old grandmother in rural Karnataka, India.
Right.
She has never owned a smartphone.
Yeah.
She cannot read or write. Historically, her only access to medical knowledge is traveling miles to a clinic and hoping a doctor has 5 minutes to speak to her.
Which rarely happens.
But now, she can walk up to a terminal in her village, speak naturally in Canada, describe her joint pain or her grandson's cough, and the machine speaks back to her in her own language with a calm, reassuring voice, utilizing color codes she can instantly comprehend.
It completely flattens the linguistic hierarchy of medicine.
Let me another example.
Consider a Polish construction worker living in a dense urban area in London. He's experiencing severe chest pain, but he delays seeking care for days because he is terrified of navigating the NHS bureaucracy, or he fears he won't be able to adequately describe his pain in English to a triage nurse.
So he just suffers in silence.
Exactly. But the Prima kiosk in his local community pharmacy allows him to bypass that linguistic trauma entirely.
That's incredible.
Or an Arabic-speaking refugee recently relocated to Germany. The language barrier, which is a massive driver of medical anxiety and delayed intervention, is instantly eradicated. The system is so heavily optimized for audio-visual interaction that it seamlessly assists blind or severely visually impaired users, too.
But the briefing reveals that the community usage of these kiosks goes far beyond pure medical triage.
Yes, it does.
And this is where the project evolves from a clever public health tool into a foundational platform for community empowerment. The kiosks are actively being used by illiterate populations to translate, read, and understand official letters.
This circles back perfectly to our initial discussion about the hidden drivers of illness.
The paper pathogens.
Exactly. People are bringing final demand letters from banks, eviction notices from landlords, legal summons, or complex government forms from schools directly to the kiosk.
Because if you cannot read, an official-looking document with a red stamp on it is a source of pure, unadulterated terror. You don't know if you're being evicted, if you owe thousands of dollars, or if your child is being expelled.
So what do?
You take that piece of paper, you put it on your table, and you just stare at it for weeks.
And the cortisol builds?
The anxiety eats away at your gastrointestinal tract. It ruins your sleep. Your heart rate elevates. The sociological stress physically breaks your body down until you end up in the emergency room with acute abdominal pain.
And the Prima kiosk intercepts that specific pathogen. The user can hold the letter up to the kiosk's camera or have the local operator scan it, and Dr. Maya will translate the complex legal or financial jargon into simple, reassuring audio instructions in their native dialect. It explains the problem without judgment and suggests the next logical step.
It effectively treats the sociological root cause before it can manifest as a biological emergency.
The analytical framework the briefing uses to describe this phenomenon is the shift from dependency to dignity.
I love that phrase.
Mainstream healthcare and bureaucratic systems often infantilize vulnerable populations. They demand blind compliance. Take this pill, sign this form, wait in this line.
Right, there's no agency.
The Prima platform fundamentally redistributes knowledge. It restores agency to individuals who are normally ignored by the system, giving them the data they need to understand their own bodies and their own social reality. It replaces blind trust with informed decision-making.
That is a beautiful humanitarian vision. But, you know, as an impact investor reviewing this briefing, my immediate cynical reaction is, how is this funded?
Always the big question.
Because relying on perpetual donor grants and government charity to maintain a global network of hardware terminals is a guaranteed path to failure. Charity runs out.
It always does.
So what is the actual economic engine that keeps these screens powered on and these servers running?
And this is where the deployment strategy becomes genuinely revolutionary for policymakers and social entrepreneurs.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Prima is not structured as a pure charity sinkhole. It is designed as a highly scalable, localized economic engine. It operates on a micro-entrepreneurship model.
Micro-entrepreneurship. So they aren't just giving them away.
Right. You do not just drop a kiosk into a village square and hope someone plugs it in. The kiosks are owned and operated by individuals called community health navigators.
Let's define the profile of a community health navigator, because they aren't importing highly paid IT technicians from the capital city.
Not at all. The navigators are sourced directly from the most marginalized segments of the local population. They are impoverished mothers, local street vendors, neighborhood chemists, teenagers, or orphans who are specifically trained by partnering NGOs to operate and safeguard the kiosk.
So they become the custodian of the technology.
And crucially, they are compensated. They run the kiosk as a micro-business.
I saw the financial projections in the briefing. They show that in a country like India, a kiosk operator can generate between $30,000 to $50,000 monthly.
Which is life-changing money in those areas.
Absolutely. And in a Western market like the UK, a navigator operating a terminal in a community center or pharmacy can earn the equivalent of £15 to £20 an hour.
They generate this income by charging a highly affordable, fractional fee for the triage consultation. For instance, €100 in India, or perhaps £5 in the UK.
And can they do other things to make money?
Oh, yeah. They can also create ancillary revenue streams by charging nominal fees for printing translated documents or facilitating a connected telemedicine call with a local specialist or counselor.
I really want to highlight the behavioral economics of this structure because it solves one of the hardest problems in public health, which is trust.
Trust is everything.
When a centralized government authority or a wealthy international NGO swoops into a marginalized community with a new medical mandate, the immediate local reaction is often suspicion and resistance. But if the person guiding you through the Prima interface is the mother who lives 3 doors down from you, or the local chemist you have bought soap from for 10 years, the trust dynamic is completely inverted.
You are interacting with a known, trusted community member who speaks your dialect and understands your cultural context. Furthermore, because it is a micro-business, the local navigator has a vested economic incentive to keep the hardware clean, to keep it secure, and to actively encourage the community to utilize the service.
So the economic incentives are perfectly aligned with the public health outcomes.
Exactly.
But the microeconomics of the local operator is only one layer. The macroeconomic structure of the entire Prima ecosystem is built on what the briefing calls a triple-purpose financial model.
Yes, the 25-25-50 split.
Let's break down the math of this split, because this is the exact mechanism that proves scalability to the capital markets.
The financial architecture is brilliantly balanced. The first 25% of the revenue is categorized as commercial.
So where does that money go?
This capital flows to the local kiosk operators we just discussed and to the impact investors who funded the initial hardware deployment.
And the briefing projects up to a 75% annual return on investment for the commercial capital. I mean, I need to push you on that number because a 75% ROI in rural public health sounds mathematically impossible to traditional investors.
I know it sounds high.
How does a 100 consultation fee compound into a 75% return?
It is entirely a function of volume, hyperlow variable costs, and asymmetric information. The capital expenditure manufacturing and deploying the solar power terminal is a fixed one-time cost.
Right.
Because the AI software scales infinitely at near zero marginal cost, and the local operator is driving massive daily footfall due to the high density of unaddressed medical anxiety in these communities, the unit economics become highly profitable very quickly.
Oh, I see.
You are capturing thousands of microtransactions a month with almost zero overhead. It vastly outperforms standard stock market indices or traditional real estate yields.
So the first 25% drives the profit and sustains the local operator. What about the second 25%?
The next 25% is automatically routed into a free access fund.
What does that do?
This is the localized safety net. It guarantees that the system never turns away the most desperately vulnerable individuals. If an unemployed person, an elderly pensioner, a recently arrived asylum seeker, or someone on universal credit in the UK approaches the kiosk, they do not pay.
How does the machine know?
They input their government ID or scan a specific card, the system instantly verifies their status, and the consultation is entirely free.
That is a phenomenal cross-subsidization model. The commercial volume generated by those who can afford the microfee effectively subsidizes the humanitarian access for those who cannot.
And it completely eliminates the need for the operator to make complex moral judgments at the point of care. The math handles the charity.
Okay, so that's 50% total. And finally, the remaining 50% of the global revenue is channeled directly to the Dr. Maya Foundation.
This is the macro-level engine.
Right, this massive pool of capital funds, continuous research and development. Like, for instance, integrating advanced biometric sensors or remote vitals monitoring into future iterations of the kiosk.
It also funds large-scale global AMR awareness campaigns.
And most importantly, it finances the manufacturing and deployment of thousands of new kiosks into the lowest-income countries across sub-Saharan Africa, rural Asia, and Latin America.
The 50% allocation ensures that the overarching NGO becomes a completely self-sustaining entity. It permanently breaks the cycle of begging for donor grants.
The network mathematically funds its own aggressive global expansion.
It is a closed-loop economic ecosystem that scales human dignity alongside capital returns.
But, you know, if we pull back the lens and look at the macro-level implications, what actually happens to the massive, centralized, heavily bureaucratic national health infrastructures?
Like the NHS.
Right. Like the National Health Service in the UK or the sprawling hospital networks in the US or India. What happens to them when a decentralized network of prima kiosks achieves critical mass and begins intercepting millions of anxious patients?
The systemic impact is profound. The briefing relies on a very specific conceptual metaphor. Prima functions as a critical bridge.
A bridge between what?
Currently, the global health landscape is fractured into three completely isolated, non-communicating silos. First, you have millions of terrified patients who cannot access timely care and are guessing about their symptoms.
Right, the patients.
Second, you have an exhausted, overwhelmed population of doctors and nurses who have absolutely no time to see the patients who actually need them.
And the third silo.
And third, you have national public health authorities who are operating blind, lacking real-time, granular data on what specific pathogens or anxieties are actually circulating in local communities.
The Prima network connects all three. It provides immediate reassurance to the patient, it filters out the noise for the doctor, and it serves as a massive, real-time syndromic surveillance network for the government.
Exactly. To understand the necessity of that bridge, we have to look at the raw operational data from centralized systems. The briefing highlights the current state of the UK's National Health Service as a prime example of systemic failure.
Yeah, let's talk about the NHS.
The NHS is currently staring down a projected $6.4 billion deficit for the 2024 to 2025 fiscal cycle.
$6.4 billion, that's a massive hole.
The average wait time simply to secure a routine general practitioner appointment has ballooned to 14.5 days. And their accident and emergency departments are catastrophically missing their mandatory 4-hour triage and treatment targets. The system is physically and financially drowning.
But the tragic irony hidden within their own operational data is that 25 to 30% of all those GP appointments and a massive percentage of the A&E visits are for minor ailments that could be entirely self-managed at home.
The system isn't drowning in terminal illness. It is drowning in unmanaged anxiety.
So what happens when you introduce Prima?
By deploying a dense network of Prima kiosks, the Mathematical Models project that we can successfully intercept and divert 25 to 40% of those avoidable clinical visits.
The macroeconomic savings of diverting 40% of unnecessary hospital traffic is staggering. It frees up billions in operational capital and thousands of hours of highly specialized clinical time.
It does.
But let's move away from the macroeconomic theory and ground this in a highly specific, visceral reality. The briefing provides a detailed case study regarding a community pharmacy.
The front line of public health.
Right. Walk us through the mechanics of the sore throat case study.
The scenario is universal. A 26-year-old individual walks into a busy local pharmacy. They are experiencing a sore throat, a mild fever, general fatigue, and a persistent cough that they have had for about 48 hours. They are physically uncomfortable, but more importantly, they're psychologically frightened because the symptoms are disrupting their ability to work. They walk up to the pharmacist's counter, highly agitated, and demand a course of strong, broad-spectrum antibiotics.
This is the exact flashpoint where the antimicrobial resistance crisis accelerates, the terrified patient demanding the chemical weapon.
Precisely. Without a structured, objective triage system, the local pharmacist is placed in an impossible position.
Because they have to deal with this angry person.
Yeah, they're facing an angry, anxious customer. They might feel intense commercial pressure to simply make the sale and appease the customer. Alternatively, they might want to reassure the patient, but they lack the diagnostic tools to definitively prove the infection is viral, not bacterial.
And they are terrified of the liability.
Exactly, the liability of sending the patient away only to have the patient develop a severe secondary infection. So the path of least resistance is to cave to the pressure.
They sell the antibiotic.
They sell the antibiotic, the patient feels a placebo effect of safety, and the invisible crisis of AMR ticks one step closer to global failure.
But in the new paradigm, we introduced the Prima kiosk. Physically located right next to the pharmacy counter, the dynamic completely shifts.
Completely. The pharmacist redirects the anxious patient to the kiosk. The patient spends 12 minutes interacting with Dr. Maya.
And what happens in those 12 minutes?
The AI asks natural conversational questions. It evaluates the exact pattern of the physical symptoms, cross-references the duration, and critically tags the patient's emotional state of high anxiety. It processes the vector space of the data and outputs a clear, visual, yellow code.
Yellow indicating mild to moderate severity, with instructions to self-manage or seek basic advice from the chemist.
Right. The patient returns to the counter, but the power dynamic has completely transformed. The pharmacist now possesses a documented AI-backed objective risk assessment.
So they aren't just guessing anymore.
No. They can look at the terrified 26-year-old and say, with total clinical confidence, the AI triage confirms this is a viral pattern. It does not require immediate aggressive antibiotics.
You need rest, aggressive hydration, and over-the-counter fever management.
Exactly. And more importantly, here's a printed list of the specific warning signs to watch for over the next 24 hours.
It is a masterstroke. Yeah. The patient feels thoroughly evaluated and heard. Their psychological fear is successfully managed. The pharmacist is legally and professionally protected by the documented triage output.
And most crucially for the survival of modern medicine, that highly valuable course of antibiotics remains locked on the shelf.
The impact metrics tied to this specific intervention are breathtaking. The briefing calculates that if the Prima system prevents just 5 unnecessary antibiotic prescriptions per pharmacy per day,
Just 5.
that single kiosk avoids the distribution of over 1,800 unnecessary courses of antibiotics every single year.
Multiply that by a network of 10,000 pharmacies, and you're actively starting the AMR crisis of the fuel it needs to mutate.
And the downstream effects on the broader medical infrastructure are equally massive. General practitioner clinics that have integrated the Prima logic into their patient flow report a 40 to 60% reduction in routine, time-consuming administrative queries.
The clinic phone lines aren't jammed with people asking if a mild fever is dangerous or demanding an explanation for a routine test result.
And perhaps the most counterintuitive yet beautiful data point in the entire briefing.
The satisfaction scores.
Yes. Despite patients physically seeing a human doctor far less frequently, patient satisfaction scores actually leap from a baseline of 72% up to 91%.
Because it reveals a fundamental truth about human nature. When we are scared, we don't necessarily want a highly specialized biological mechanic to inspect us. We want immediate, understandable, compassionate answers that calm our racing
We
minds.
just want to know what to do next.
Exactly. The data provides an undeniable conclusion. The Prima ecosystem saves massive amounts of clinical time. It saves billions in structural healthcare costs.
And most importantly, it saves lives by intercepting the chain of infection and fear at the local community level long before it ever has a chance to breach the walls of a hospital.
Yeah, that's really the bottom line.
So as we synthesize all of this, the core thesis for the impact investors, the CSR directors, the philanthropic leaders, and the policymakers listening to this deep dive is clear.
It is very clear.
The Prima kiosk, powered by Dr. Maya GPT, is not an incremental improvement to a broken app. It is a highly scalable, fiercely human-centered revolution. It attacks the crisis at its actual root.
It takes the paralyzing biological and sociological fear that is currently crushing our medical infrastructure and transmutes it into actionable knowledge.
It replaces blind panic with localized empowerment. It constructs a brilliant model of distributed prosperity by generating dignified income for local community navigators.
And it does all of this while actively defending the global population from the existential, fast-approaching threat of antimicrobial resistance.
If we step back and look at the grand arc of medical history, for the last century, we have operated under the assumption that advanced healthcare meant constructing ever larger, more expensive, more heavily centralized mega hospitals.
We equated safety with massive MRI machines, sterile white corridors, and distant specialists.
Right. But as the biology of antimicrobial resistance fundamentally alters the reality of those environments, turning the very hospitals we rely on into the most dangerous genetic trading floors on Earth, where a panic attack over a bank letter can result in an untreatable, lethal superbug infection, we are forced to completely reimagine our geography of care.
We must rigorously ask ourselves, what happens to society when the ultimate center of healing, safety, and reassurance is no longer the imposing clinical hospital in the city, but the empowered local community?
Standing together at a touch-free screen, speaking in their own dialect, and finally taking control of their own narrative.
It is a profound, necessary shift in how we define healing.
It really is. We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of the Prima kiosk and the immense potential of Dr. Maya GPT.
Thank you.
We strongly encourage you to deeply consider your role and the strategic deployment of your capital, your policy influence, and your platforms as we navigate our way through this post-antibiotic era.
The tools to intercept the collapse, to build the bridge between fear and empowerment, are sitting right in front of us.
The only question remaining is whether we have the collective will to deploy them.